The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their massive ships moved like silent death through the void, each one carrying enough firepower to crack planets. At the heart of their fleet was the Pale Dragon, a living creature the size of a small moon, bred for war and bonded to the imperial family through ancient blood magic. Captain Thexara stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Bone Render, watching the latest batch of human prisoners being loaded into the holding cells. The humans were a new species, discovered only 50 years ago on a small blue world at the galaxy's edge. They were weak, fragile things with short lifespans and primitive technology, perfect for the Empire's needs. "How many this time?" Thexara asked his lieutenant. 237, sir, mostly young ones. The breeding programs require fresh genetic material. Thexara nodded. The humans bred quickly, and their children adapted well to the various experiments the Imperial scientists conducted. Some became living computers, their brains enhanced with cybernetic implants. Others were modified for manual labor in the deep mines of Korath Prime. The unlucky ones became test subjects for new weapons and diseases. Deep in the ship's lowest levels, a human girl named Sarah pressed herself against the cold metal wall of her cell. She was 17, though she looked younger after months of poor food and constant fear. Her brown hair hung in dirty strands around her face, and her green eyes had lost much of their light. Sarah had been taken from Earth during the last raid on her settlement. She watched through the small window of her transport as her home burned behind them. Her parents, her little brother, everyone she knew was either dead or scattered across the Empire's slave networks. The cell door hissed open and 2 Zephyrian guards entered. They were tall, pale beings with elongated limbs and black eyes that seemed to absorb light. One carried a neural prod, the other a portable scanner. "Subject 7749, the first guard said in broken human English. "Time for testing." Sarah didn't resist as they dragged her from the cell. Resistance only brought pain, and she had learned to save her strength for when it mattered. They led her through corridors lined with more cells, each containing humans in various states of despair. Some called out to her, others just stared with hollow eyes. The testing chamber was a sterile white room filled with strange machines. Dr. Vexoth waited for her, his 4 arms already preparing various instruments. The Zephyrian scientist had been studying humans for decades, fascinated by their unusual neural patterns and emotional responses. "Ah, Subject 7749, he said in perfect English. "Today we test pain tolerance thresholds. My research suggests your species has unusual reactions to prolonged suffering." Sarah was strapped to a metal table. She had endured this routine many times before. The doctor would inflict various forms of pain while monitoring her brain activity and stress responses. The data helped the Empire design more effective torture techniques for interrogating human prisoners. The first shock sent lightning through her nervous system. Sarah bit down hard on the leather guard they had placed in her mouth to prevent her from biting her tongue. She had learned not to scream. The Zephyrians seemed to enjoy the sounds humans made when they suffered. What Dr. Vexoth didn't know was that Sarah was different from other humans. During her first weeks of captivity, something had awakened in her mind. She could sense the emotions and thoughts of others around her. The ability grew stronger with each torture session, as if pain itself was feeding her power. As the doctor increased the intensity of his experiments, Sarah felt something vast and ancient stirring in the depths of the ship. It was a presence older than the Empire itself, filled with rage and hunger that had been building for millennia. The Pale Dragon. The creature had been bound to serve the Empire through blood magic and neural implants, but its true nature remained wild and predatory. For 3,000 years, it had carried the Empire's fleets across the galaxy, watching as they enslaved and destroyed countless worlds. Deep in its alien consciousness, hatred festered like an infected wound. Sarah's psychic abilities, enhanced by her suffering, began to reach out across the ship. She touched the minds of other human prisoners, feeling their pain and desperation. Then, stretching further, her thoughts brushed against something immense and furious. The pale dragon felt the human girl's mind like a whisper in the darkness. For the first time in centuries, it sensed something other than the cold commands of its Zephyrian masters. Here was a mind that understood suffering, that burned with the same rage that filled its own ancient heart. In the testing chamber, Dr. Vexoth noticed unusual readings on his instruments. The human's neural activity was spiking beyond normal parameters. Her stress hormones should have peaked hours ago, but instead they continued climbing. More interesting, scans showed unusual electromagnetic emissions coming from her brain. "Fascinating," he muttered, adjusting his equipment. "I must document this anomaly." He increased the power to the pain inducers, not realizing that each shock was strengthening the connection between the human girl and the massive creature that carried their ship through space. Sarah's eyes rolled back as her mind expanded beyond the confines of her tortured body, reaching out to touch something that had waited 3,000 years for a reason to break free. The pale dragon's ancient eyes, each the size of a city block, suddenly blazed with new awareness. Deep in space, its massive form began to stir as impulses other than imperial commands flowed through its nervous system. For the first time since its enslavement began, the creature felt something that resembled hope. Change was coming to the galaxy, and it would begin in a small white room where a human girl refused to break. Sarah's connection with the pale dragon grew stronger over the following weeks. Each torture session brought their minds closer together, creating a bond that transcended species and space. She learned that the creature's name was Vithara, which meant Star Eater in the old tongue. It had once been free to roam between galaxies, feeding on cosmic radiation and dancing with solar winds. The Empire had captured Vithara when it was young, barely 1,000 years old. They used forbidden rituals to bind its will to their own, turning a majestic cosmic being into a living starship. For 3 millennia, it had been forced to carry their armies across space, watching helplessly as they conquered and enslaved world after world. Through their psychic link, Sarah felt the dragon's memories. She saw beautiful civilizations reduced to ash, peaceful species hunted to extinction, entire planets stripped bare for the Empire's endless hunger. The Zephyrians took everything they wanted and destroyed what they couldn't use. They had done the same to Earth, and they would continue until every free world bowed before them. Dr. F. Vexoth remained fascinated by Sarah's unusual readings. He had begun conducting longer sessions, pushing her to the very edge of what a human body could endure. Unknown to him, each moment of agony only strengthened her bond with Vithara. The dragon's ancient consciousness began sharing its knowledge with her, teaching her how to manipulate energy and matter on a quantum level. One night, as Sarah lay recovering in her cell, she felt Vithara's attention focus on something new. Through the dragon's senses, she perceived a massive fleet gathering at the edge of the system. Hundreds of human ships, cobbled together from salvaged technology and burning with desperate determination. "The Resistance," she whispered to herself. Word had spread throughout human space about the Empire's latest raiding campaign. Survivors from dozens of attacked colonies had banded together, combining their few remaining ships into a desperate strike force. They knew they couldn't match the Empire's firepower, but they had decided to make their last stand, rather than watch more of their people disappear into Zephyrian slave pens. Admiral Chen commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the Defiance, a converted mining vessel that now bristled with improvised weapons. She was an older woman who had lost her family in the first raids on Earth. Like all the resistance leaders, she fought not for victory but for the chance to inflict some damage before the end. "All ships, prepare for final approach," she broadcast to the fleet. We're going to hit them fast and hard. Target their weapon systems and try to free as many prisoners as possible before they overwhelm us." The human ships accelerated toward the Imperial fleet, their crews knowing they were flying to their deaths. They had no idea that deep within the enemy flagship, a tortured girl was about to change the course of galactic history. Sarah felt the approaching battle through Vithara's senses. The dragon's massive form tensed with anticipation as Imperial commanders prepared for combat. She could feel the creature's rage building as it was forced to turn its weapons against the very people it had come to see as kindred spirits. In the testing chamber, Dr. Vexoth was preparing his most ambitious experiment yet. He had developed a new neural stimulator designed to completely break a subject's will to resist. The device could rewrite memory patterns and personality matrices, turning any prisoner into a perfectly obedient slave. "Today, Subject 7749, you become the first of a new generation," he said, as guards strapped Sarah to the enhanced restraint system. "When I am finished, you will forget your human identity entirely. You will exist only to serve the Empire." The machine hummed to life, sending waves of psychic energy directly into Sarah's brain. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced before, as if her very soul was being torn apart and rebuilt. But instead of breaking her connection with Vithara, the neural assault had the opposite effect. The dragon felt Sarah's agony as if it were its own. 3,000 years of suppressed rage suddenly focused into a single point of pure fury. The neural implants that controlled Vithara's behavior began to overload as the creature's emotions spiked beyond their ability to contain. Deep within the dragon's massive brain, ancient circuits began to burn out one by one. The Empire's control systems, designed to last forever, had never been tested against the kind of psychic feedback that Sarah's tortured mind was generating. As each control node failed, more of Vithara's original personality reasserted itself. On the bridge of the Bone Render, Captain Thexara was coordinating the fleet's response to the human attack when his instruments began showing impossible readings. The pale dragon's biosignatures were fluctuating wildly, and several of its control systems were showing critical failures. "Engineering, what's happening to our host creature?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. Multiple neural pathways are going offline. It's as if the dragon is fighting the control implants." Thexara felt a chill of fear. If they lost control of Vithara, the consequences would be catastrophic. The creature was powerful enough to destroy their entire fleet if it turned against them. In the testing chamber, Dr. Vexoth watched in horror as his subject's brain patterns reached levels that should have been impossible for any living being. Sarah's body was glowing with an inner light, and the air around her crackled with energy discharges. "Shut it down!" he screamed at his assistants. "The neural stimulator is overloading!" But it was too late. The psychic connection between Sarah and Vithara had reached critical mass. The dragon's consciousness, freed from centuries of artificial restraints, blazed across space like a newborn star. Every Zephyrian in the fleet suddenly felt the creature's fury pressing against their minds. Vithara's massive eyes opened fully for the first time in 3 millennia. Its voice, like the sound of colliding galaxies, echoed through every speaker on every ship in the Imperial fleet. "I remember," it said in the old tongue. "I remember what I was before you chained me. I remember every world you forced me to watch you destroy." The dragon's body began to convulse, shaking the entire fleet. Ships that had been attached to its hull for decades were torn free and sent spinning into space. The pale dragon was no longer pale. Its hide blazed with cosmic fire as power that had been suppressed for millennia began to flow freely through its body. In her cell, Sarah smiled through tears of pain and joy. The plan forming in her mind was terrible and beautiful and completely human in its defiant impossibility. She was going to help a star-eating dragon remember how to be free, and together they were going to teach the Empire what happened when you pushed humanity too far. The transformation of Vithara sent shockwaves through both fleets. The pale dragon's massive form writhed in space as 3,000 years of suppressed power erupted from its core. Bioluminescent patterns raced across its hide like living lightning, and its wings spread wide enough to eclipse entire star systems. Captain Thexara's command center descended into chaos as control systems failed throughout the Imperial fleet. The other ships that made up their formation began to drift as the dragon's movements disrupted their formation protocols. Emergency alarms blared as the creature they had relied upon for transport and protection turned into something beyond their worst nightmares. "All batteries! Target the dragon's neural control centers!" Thexara ordered desperately. "We must regain control before it destroys us all!" The Imperial weapons fired in unison, sending streams of plasma and antimatter toward Vithara's head. But the dragon's hide, now blazing with cosmic energy, absorbed the attacks harmlessly. If anything, the assault only enraged the creature further. In the testing chamber, Dr. Vexoth and his assistants fled as Sarah's body erupted with psychic energy. The neural stimulator exploded in a shower of sparks, and the walls began to buckle under waves of telekinetic force. Sarah floated free of her restraints, her eyes glowing with the same cosmic fire that now surrounded Vithara. Through their shared consciousness, Sarah experienced what it felt like to be a being capable of traveling between galaxies. She felt the dragon's memories of freedom, of dancing through nebulae and feeding on the radiation of newborn stars. The Empire had tried to turn this magnificent creature into nothing more than a living tool, just as they had tried to break her own spirit in these sterile chambers. "Never again," she whispered, and her voice carried across space to every human prisoner in the fleet. Admiral Chen watched in amazement as the massive dragon turned its attention away from the approaching human fleet. The creature's mental roar, transmitted on all frequencies, spoke of rage and freedom and the promise of revenge. For the first time since the battle began, she dared to hope. "All ships, hold position," she ordered. "I think something incredible is about to happen." Vithara's massive head turned toward the Imperial flagship, and when it spoke, its voice shook the hull plating of every nearby vessel. "You made me carry your armies across the void," it said, each word dripping with millennia of accumulated hatred. "You forced me to watch as you enslaved entire species. But worst of all, you made me participate in the torture of those who reminded me what freedom meant." The dragon's claws, each the size of a battleship, reached out to grasp the bone render. Thexara and his crew felt their ship groan under impossible pressure as Vithara lifted them like a toy. "You will release every prisoner," the dragon continued. "Every human. Every member of every species you have enslaved. You will do this now, or I will demonstrate why my kind were once known as star-eaters." Throughout the fleet, prison ships began opening their cargo holds. Zephyrian guards, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure radiating from the enraged dragon, abandoned their posts and fled toward escape pods. Thousands of human prisoners poured out of the holding areas, many seeing open sky for the first time in months or years. Sarah felt their liberation through the psychic network she had established. Each freed mind added to her growing power, creating a feedback loop that made her connection with Vithara even stronger. She began to understand that this moment had been building since the first human was taken prisoner. Every act of cruelty, every broken spirit, every life lost had been preparing for this uprising. "You think your little rebellion matters?" Thexara snarled from the bridge of his captured ship. "The Empire spans 1,000 systems. We have conquered species far more advanced than humanity. Your dragon cannot protect you forever." Sarah's voice answered him, carried on cosmic winds from one end of the fleet to the other. "You're right," she said. "Vithara can't protect us forever. But you made a mistake when you decided to see how much pain a human could endure before breaking. You taught us that we don't break. We adapt, we learn, and we remember everything you've done to us." The dragon's massive form began to move through space with fluid grace, no longer bound by the mechanical constraints the Empire had imposed. It approached the human fleet, and Admiral Chen felt tears in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Resistance," she broadcast to all ships. "To any humans hearing this transmission, you are no longer prisoners. You are free." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices filled the communication channels as freed humans called out to their rescuers, sharing information about other prison fleets and Imperial bases. Many had been held captive for years and possessed detailed intelligence about the Empire's operations. Vithara addressed the human fleet directly, its ancient mind touching theirs with surprising gentleness. "Children of Earth," it said, "I have carried the Empire's darkness for 3 millennia, but in your girl Sarah, I found something I had forgotten existed. Hope, defiance, the refusal to surrender even when defeat seems certain. These are not weaknesses to be exploited, as the Empire believes. They are the greatest strengths any species can possess." The dragon's massive form began to glow brighter as it prepared for what came next. "I offer you a choice," it continued. "I can return you to your homeworld, and you can live in peace while the Empire rebuilds its forces. Or you can come with me, and together we will ensure that no other species suffers as humanity has suffered." The answer came not from Admiral Chen or any other leader, but from the thousands of former prisoners who had experienced the Empire's cruelty firsthand. Their voices joined together in a single word that echoed across space: together. Sarah felt their determination through the psychic network, and she smiled despite her exhaustion. The Empire had tried to break humanity's spirit through torture and slavery. Instead, they had forged something stronger than any weapon, a bond between species that transcended the boundaries of flesh and space. Vithara's massive wings spread wide as the liberated fleet arranged itself around the dragon's body. No longer a prison ship, the creature had become the flagship of the greatest rebellion the galaxy had ever seen. Together they would visit every Imperial stronghold and every prison world. They would free every slave and topple every tyrant. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled through fear for 3,000 years. But they had never encountered anything like humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat, or the fury of an ancient dragon that had finally remembered how to be free. The galaxy was about to change, and the transformation would be written in starfire and human determination. As their unlikely alliance began its journey toward the Empire's core worlds, Sarah knew that the torture chambers had taught her something the Zephyrians never intended. Pain could be transformed into power, suffering could become strength, and sometimes the greatest victories came from refusing to surrender, even when everything seemed lost. The pale dragon was pale no longer, and the human spirit burned brighter than any star.